Hello and welcome to Tutorial Tuesdays, episode 11. In this week's tutorial, we are going to learn how to use dynamic paint to frost over a window, like animate it frosting over. It's not necessarily going to look realistic per se, but it is going to look pretty cool. And our ice texture is also not going to look super realistic, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second. But again, it's just gonna look cool, and that is what I am going for. So in real life, ice looks like this when it frosts over a window. It has all these cool, like, almost floral patterns, and I didn't feel like painting a texture for a tutorial tonight, especially since the focus is going to be a dynamic paint. But if you all really want to, you can explore doing textures like this on your windows. So let's go ahead and get started on how to use the dynamic paint feature to make a window frost over. Dynamic paint is very interesting because it can be used for all sorts of cool things like wet maps, making rain, realistic droplets and stuff hit the pavement, and things like that, but it can also be used for much more creative purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on screencast keys here so you all can see what I'm doing right here. But to use dynamic paint, you need a lot of subdivisions, and preferably square. So I'm going to make these about square. That looks about right. They're not perfectly square. We could scale it up a little bit, whatever. Then we're going to take it and subdivide it a lot by hitting W. And that's because the vertex, the paint is based on our vertex paint layer, which can only be as high resolution as your subdivisions on your mesh. You can also export it as an image sequence, but I prefer personally to just use a high resolution mesh for quick projects like this. So that completes our window model. Awesome. Then to animate the dynamic paint, we can take a sphere, and let's say you want the ice to stroke up like this, whoosh, and then sort of grow out from there. How we can do that is we can animate the sphere by hitting I. We're on frame 1 right now, so I, location, rotation, scale. Let's say it takes like 15 frames to get there. Then we can move it here, scale it down to 0, and insert another location, rotation, scale keyframe. So then the software does all of the in-betweening for us. We probably want it to start closer to the mesh for its starting position so we get more detail in our swoosh. Now this is a straight line, and you could easily just add some keyframes to make it curved, but it would be a lot cleaner to use the graph editor, so we're going to do that. So we want to move it on the y-axis basically when in the center, so we can take these handles of our y-axis in the graph editor, and we can move it that way to make it go to swoosh in, or we can move it that way to make it swoosh out. Let's make it swoosh out, I think. So now it's sort of, let's make it move in a little bit more and scale that down, but now it has a nice curved motion to it. Whoosh. Okay, cool. So we have just completed our brush for the dynamic paint. Now how dynamic paint works is we need a brush and a canvas. So let's go ahead and add those. Go over here to the physics panel. I always forget what the panel is called, but I know what it is. And then we can add a brush to this, and we can go to dynamic paint and add a canvas to our window. So all of a sudden, whoa, we have this awesome swooshy motion. Very cool. However, that's not quite what we want. We want a black and white image for our texture because we're going to use it as a mask to mix between the ice material and the window material. How you do that is use the wet map, and then you hit add on this wet map right here, and then it adds this vertex color channel to our object. So now if we animate like this, we get this nice swooshing motion that is applying to our plane. However, you'll notice there is space between the spheres, so I believe there is a way to add subframes to the simulation. Let's take a look. Alright, so I actually don't know where the subframes are because I didn't use them when I was testing this. Oh, substeps right here at the top. So we can add like maybe 3 substeps, and then whoosh. All of a sudden our line is starting to have in-betweens. What the substeps are is it calculates where the sphere is between the frames, because previously it was only calculating on the frames in which the sphere actually technically as per animation, it jumps. Like, dude, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there. It's not actually moving all throughout space. The substeps let it subdivide that down quite a good bit, depending on how many substeps you add. So let's go to 5, and now that adds a pretty good line. I'm pretty satisfied with that. So, how do we make this ice grow out? Well, first of all, we're going to want to go to the Dynamic Paint Effects and use Spread. I think I used a value of 3 when I was testing this project. So now this is going to grow out like that. That's pretty cool. But it doesn't look very realistic or believable. We need some like swirling motion of the ice frosting over. And how we approach that is with the drip. So we can turn on drip, turn off gravity. And the drip is doing nothing right now, and that's because we don't have any turbulence, we don't have any magneticism or anything like that. And how you add that is with an empty. So I'll add a plane axis, and we will add a force field, which will be turbulence. So now if we animate it, the turbulence will start to affect our output, which it's not affecting it very much right now, but we can up the strength to maybe 12, and then all of a sudden, we get this really cool like swirling motion of the ice growing out. But we're not quite there yet. First of all, I want to turn down the scale. So 0, from what I found, equals a value of 1 basically. We want to go to half of 1. 0 is basically off for the scale, I believe. 1 is the normal size, which is 0, and then anything lower than that is smaller. So we turn it down to 0.5, we get a lot more detail in our turbulence animating out. We can probably also go ahead and take our spread and turn it down to 1 or 2. Let's go with 2 for now and see what happens. So now we get this cool frosty motion of it sort of spreading out. But that's not quite good enough. What we want to do next is add a texture to this to break it up even more and make it look even cooler. And I'm going to go ahead and save just in case it crashes. And let's find out how to do the texture. So, there is an area for the texture. I have lost it because I am not prepared. Okay, well, I thought it was right around here. I'm going to actually pause and find the texture option. Okay, I remember where the texture option is, and now I feel very stupid. But basically, the texture option is another type of force field. So we need a second empty, so I duplicated this one. Then, under the force fields, rather than turbulence, we need to choose texture. And let's see what that does to our animation right off the bat. You'll notice that it starts to break things up a lot more, which is pretty cool. But we can go ahead and further manipulate that texture. You want to go to cycles, by the way. But we can add a new texture and see what happens. Okay, so it's going pretty slow, which is fully expected because of a super high resolution geometry, and we have textures and we have turbulence and we're trying to simulate this thing. So it's perfectly expected that it's going to go a little bit slow, but you can see how the texture is starting to break it up a little bit more, but the texture size is a little bit small. We can change that right here under the texture panel on the empty and change it up to maybe 0.6 and change the depth up to maybe 5. Just increase the depth, increases the subdivisions of the noise, which makes it more detailed. Okay, so now we're getting this really cool looking spreading sort of ice thing. I'll let you all play with your settings, see how much you want to mess with it. I'm going to go ahead and personally turn the turbulence up to maybe 30 just to get it a little bit more exaggerated. But then we can go ahead and bake this out after we make sure we're fine with it. So now the window is starting to frost and it looks pretty cool. But we need to figure out how to use this vertex paint as a texture. The first step, as I said, is to bake it out. You can go down to the dynamic paint cache and hit bake. And that will bake it out for the length of the animation. So I'm going to pause the video while it's baking out just to save you some time. Okay, it finished simulating, and I'm glad that I actually paused for that because it took a good few minutes. But now we have this lag-free animation of the ice expanding on our mesh, which looks pretty cool in my opinion. It goes a little bit fast, so we could probably turn the speed down, but I will let you all handle that, which I believe there is an option for that, so you can, Okay, that's for drying, but you can play with the spread options, you can play with the turbulence options, and that will give you different speed effects for your simulation. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how that looks. It looks pretty cool. You can slow it down if you want to by messing with the settings, but let's go ahead and get into materials for the sake of keeping this video not too long. I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere and put it behind the window so we can see what the effect of the ice is on objects behind the window. Theoretically, when a window is frosted over, it will be more rough than a perfectly smooth window, so the objects will blur out more behind the ice. So let's go ahead and create a material for that. First, we need a lighting setup, so I'm going to go ahead and create a mesh plane and rotate it a little bit on the y-axis. And then I'm going to scale it up some and create a new material that is an emission and set it to about 12. So if we hit Shift Z, it will render, and that all looks fine and good. So moving right along, I'm going to split this into two panels here, so we can have one panel with the render, and I'm going to hit Control B to set a border around this area right here, so when I render, it will only render right there, which will speed things up. And then I'm also going to switch to GPU rendering, which apparently I don't have enough video memory right now because I have a bunch of internet browser tabs open. So I'm going to go to CPU again, and that should be fine for our purposes. So as far as the material is concerned, we need to create a new one, and we want a glass material, so shader glass. And already we have a window. How cool is that? But it is not quite good enough, now is it? But we can go ahead and get some nice reflection and stuff on our window by adding a background image. So I'm going to go ahead and search for a background image. You can add it right here by using nodes and using an environment texture, which I clicked on the wrong box. Environment texture is down here in this box. So I'm going to pause while I look for that texture. Okay, so I got my texture from CG Skies, which looks like, I'm not in perspective, but it looks like this. It is a beautiful sunset, and you can see our glass refracting stuff. If we want it to reflect more than it currently is, we can take our glass and do a shader, mix shader, shader glossy, like so. So we can down this to maybe 0.01 to get a nice smooth reflection, maybe even 0.005. Then we can mix that by a factor of 0.2, and that should be pretty good. Let's go ahead and add some walls around our window, just for the sake of having more accurate lighting. Alright, so this will function as our wall, and I'm going to move it down on the x-axis until it protrudes just a little bit from in front of the window, like so, to have a nice indentation in the bricks for the window. Then I'm going to hit I for inset to scale the face down. Then I'm going to select the face, scale it on the y-axis until it matches a little bit inward of the window, like so, and same on the z-axis. Then I'm going to move it and sort of center it. Then we can take that and extrude it inwards and delete the face because we don't need it, and we can also go ahead and delete this face. And now we have a nice window area around our window. So now how do we create the frosted glass? I was going to say frosting, but that is a sugary, delicious treat and not what I meant. So first things first, I'm going to turn off caustics and filter the glossy up by 2, because that will blur out the glossy rays, which will give us less fireflies, and no caustics also eliminates a lot of fireflies. So I'm going to up our light to 24. I'm going a little bit out of order here on things just to get things moving along. And I'm going to take the world and up this. What I'm trying to get it to is so I can see the sphere behind the window, which right now we can't see that very well. I think we also need to mix the reflection by a lot less. So now we have this nice reflection in front of our sphere. Let's go ahead and also pretend that this is inside of a building and add a light inside the building. Again, right now I'm just trying to make the sphere more visible so the frosted glass has more of an effect on it. I'll let you all model like a bedroom or whatever you really want to model in behind the window, But for the meantime, I'm just going to use a sphere for testing purposes. And we want emission, not diffuse. And now we have some nice lighting going on behind the window. And we can make that nice and orange like it's from a bed lamp or something. So now we have this sphere behind the window, as you can see. Let's go ahead and figure out how to use our dynamic paint data. So we want another glass texture, and we want to mix shader, and mix in the glass on the bottom slot because we want white to be the rough glass. We're going to go ahead and up the roughness to maybe 0.2 or 0.3. And that should be pretty good. Right now, you'll see that we still have the clear sphere behind it. That's because it's 50-50 mixing the perfectly clear window and the rough window. So we want to mix it so the rough is only where the white is and the clear is only where the black is. And how you do that is you input attribute. And you'll notice there is a name slot right here. To get that name, we have to make sure our window is selected, which it is. Go to the object data panel, and then come down to the vertex colors, and it's named dp_wetmap. dp_wetmap. And that will give us our nice vertex data. So we can take the factor, which is the black and white data from it, and plug it into the factor here. And now you'll start to notice the ice coming on board, which it's only rough where the ice is, which is pretty cool. So then we can take this even further because the ice is going to be a little bit bumpy. So what I did originally for this is I used a noise texture and plugged that into the displacement, which you'll see is affecting the entire window, which is fine for now because right now we just want to see what the displacement looks like. So we can input another shader and a diffuse one at that so it renders faster for our tests of our displacement, and we can do input, texture coordinate, and object. Then we can up this to maybe 12. That's pretty bumpy. Let's put it up to 50 to get a nice fine grain. Maybe 35? Okay, 35 seems to be alright for what we're going for. So we want this displacement to only affect the ice area, and we do the exact same thing we did with the attribute here. In fact, we can still use this node. We don't have to create a new attribute node. And how we do that is we say color, mix RGB. We want the ice to be above the window, so we'll make the color that it's mixing with solid black, although I put it in the wrong slot. And then we'll take the factor and plug it in right here. So now the ice is sort of protruding from the window like so. It doesn't really look like ice, but I think we will live for the meantime. And we can take the detail and up it to maybe 12 or something, maybe less just for faster render times and happiness. Then we can take our entire bump map that we mixed together, add a color ramp, and we can take this and scale it down until we're happy with how subtle it is. I personally like it pretty intense like that. It's probably a little bit intense once we add it to the glass shader, but let's take a look. We can go ahead and plug our shader back in. Nope. And there we go. Okay, so now we have our glass shader, we have our bump, and things are pretty cool. And we can go ahead and also take our second glass shader and mix that with a glossy as well. And let's say 0.1, maybe 0.05. It's still going to be pretty high reflection roughness value because there's going to be so many little ice bumps. But we can take that and mix it by a factor of 0.1. And we have our ice growing on our window, which is pretty cool. So then if you go back and forth in the animation, you can actually see it growing upwards, which is pretty neat. The window is frosting over. Maybe we actually want this to be like 0.4 or something to make it look like real frosted glass, which really has so many tiny microscopic divots in it that the specular highlight is pretty wide on ice. So we have this window that is totally frosting over. And another thing you can do is actually, I'm not positive you can do that. I was going to suggest layering over multiple dynamic paints with less and less intense ice so you can get sort of a gradient between the ice and the window. But I'm not actually sure you can add multiple dynamic paints. It does not look like you can. Oh, you can add another canvas. Okay, cool. So you can have multiple dynamic paints. You can simulate multiple, one that spreads faster, one that spreads like slightly less fast, one that spreads slightly less fast than that. That way you can get a nice gradation between the edge right here where the ice is growing out, which again is pretty cool. So that will basically conclude our tutorial on how to use dynamic paint. I mean, I'll let you all play with the materials and figure out what you want, but I just wanted to get your minds started on maybe, I don't know, using dynamic paint for something other than the typical water or wet map or something like that. I mean, you can use it for all sorts of really cool creative purposes. You can use it to put imprints in snow. You can use it to frost over glass. You can use it to switch between two textures like this, but maybe like have lava slowly hardening over with rock. You can do all sorts of crazy cool stuff with the dynamic paint feature. It really is limited to your imagination. So take that and run with it. You don't have to make a window. You can make whatever you want. And that is going to conclude my introduction to the dynamic paint feature. Hopefully you got something out of this tutorial. Hopefully I boosted your creative juices on this. And I know the frosted window doesn't look super realistic, but it's just one application you could possibly use the dynamic paint for. You don't have to use it for that. You can use it for anything you want, but mixing textures is one thing you can do, and I think that is pretty cool. So stay tuned for another tutorial next Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing scenes that you all use these sorts of techniques on. I think that would be really cool. If you use this at all, post it in the comments. I would love to see your work. That concludes the tutorial. I will see you all next Tuesday, which I already said.